Hello, good people, but now you know the deal. If the camera angle is off, it's not by design. I'm blind and it comes with the territory. Okay, so the hype has somewhat died down, and we now have some time to just mull over what Mr. Nyiko Floyd Shivambu said, right? The devil in the detail, as they say. And, part of this is because there's this culture of personality politics in South Africa. I'm not saying it's unique to South Africa, but it's quite palpable in South Africa. So when you look at a place like the United States of America, it's quite understandable because to reach the White House as president of the country, you do so as an individual. Yes, you need to get party endorsement, but by and large, those are personal projects. In South Africa, it's a bit baffling. Right? It's baffling because of our social dynamics. And maybe because of how our political system is configured, it then lends itself to this sycophantic behavior. And it would appear that Mr. Shivambu is not immune to that as well, right? He has his own groupies, and it seems as though they are becoming somewhat zealous. There's this fervor for supporting Mr. Shivambu. Now, look, this is not the point where, as they would say nowadays in the streets, I'm not hating at this point in time, but there are red flags when it comes to this. And we can't just ignore them and pretend as if it's normal. We've seen this happen with Ufaru, aka Julius Malema. We've seen this happen with Zuma, and to an extent we saw this happen with former President Mbeki, right? But perhaps the original G when it comes to having a fan club in democratic South Africa is the late President Nelson Mandela, right? But in his case, what we saw is that it didn't necessarily lead to this dichotomy of hate versus love, for and against, pro and anti, these extreme views, right? Things were a little bit more settled during his time. And besides, it was under this banner of the African National Congress, which helped him. It also helped that the world was in a transitional phase in the 90s. Be that as it may, we find ourselves now in a situation where we are living in a world of extremities. And Mr. Shivambu also happens to know this. He's quite aware of it. And no doubt his time spent within Gwafaru, the EFF, and later Moses, the MK party, kind of made him feel like, maybe I've got this as well, to some extent. And now, don't get me wrong, I like the guy. I like how he thinks about politics and how he applies himself logically, his rationale, right? It appeals to me because of my character. Not that I'm any better, but just when it comes to politics, there's going to be something that nags at you or pulls you, that attracts you. And Shivambu, I think, now that he's come to his own, now that he can be an individual that can freely express his views without reservation, but also in the short stint that he had with the MK as Secretary General, illustrate his leadership capabilities, you then get to recognize more and more what he's about. That said, we should not be disillusioned and think to ourselves, oh, okay, no, Nyiko manje sukuye ozoqhuba le nto lena. Do I think he's capable? Certainly. Certainly, I think he's capable. But do I think it's time? No, I don't necessarily think so. I don't think he's traveled the journey well enough to be able to say the baton is now with you. I think what's exciting about the Nyiko Floyd Shivambu moment is that a younger generation was asking the question, and we have been in our own circles, in our own groupings and discussions and debates, like, where to from here, right? Who's gonna take this thing over? Because we see that the apartheid activist generation, because of nature taking its course, it's phasing out, right? And so then it was a question of, who has the gravitas to become a politician, right? Faru has too many of his flaws. I think that the Faru discussion has reached a point where it's just tiring even. Like, I can't argue about, oh, you don't like Faru. It's like, no, that's not the discussion here. The discussion is, how does Faru conduct himself? How does he apply himself, right? Does he have the prerequisite qualities as a person, as a human, prior to even us talking about him as a leader, right? Because unfortunately or fortunately, when it comes to South Africa, humility matters. You got to be humble. And you got to recognize with that humility that you've been asked to serve. Not that you chose yourself to serve. And yes, characters like your Farus and others will tell you that, oh yeah, no, I was farming, I was looking after my cabbages, and people came and they asked me, right? Yeah, but then your actions tell a different story, right? And I think it's just part of the facade, right? It's part of the narrative. So anyway, look, Nyiko Floyd Shivambu is now in the spotlight. And I think he has his own groupies, right? And I believe that this should be challenged. But that's not the purpose necessarily of this episode. Well, strictly so. I do think, though, that we can reflect on what Nyiko Shivambu was doing in his presser. Yes, the MK party has serious problems, right? I've talked at length about Daddy's girl and her Skotana friends, right? And it's up to the MK to figure out how they're going to deal with it, because perceptions, unfortunately, in politics matter. They just do. Whether they like it or they don't, these things do matter. And they matter not only to quote unquote intellectuals, but to people on the ground in terms of how they process things and how these things relate to their personal circumstances. It matters because it speaks to believability, right? Do I trust? Do I have confidence that this person has what it takes to push this thing forward, to advance the movement, the struggle, and the revolution? And that's now the point where I want to get to, the revolution. I take issue with Shivambu's presentation when it comes to his articulation or disarticulation or failure to articulate, I should argue, of the purpose of what he's trying to do. Right? He can't, on the one hand, say that he believes in the MK as a revolutionary movement, and then on the other hand want to speak of a reformist agenda. Why do I say so? He gets into a presser and then he talks about the possibility of forming a political party. Why would you want to do that if you are a revolutionary? And that's why, revolutionary discussions have become just hype. It's like pop songs, Basically, it's gum. And spit it out. That's what's happening here. He's framed his question in a very peculiar way. Do the people of South Africa want a political party? How does this political party distinguish itself from other political parties? There's nothing novel in that. If anything, he's traversing the same journey as many other individuals who came to realize that they've got some support or play an important role within particular structures, but they're struggling, and now they have to redefine themselves outside those structures with that support that they believe they have. It's none too different from your terralikotas. I'm not saying that they are on the same level, sycophants, please, okay? I'm not saying that he is a lawyer, Shilowa, or whatever the case may be, busy, alwano, terralikota for cope. I'm not saying that he's like Ufar, but the journey he seems to be traveling is similar to those, right? And it's always on this, the time has come, right? The time has come. Nah, fam. Nah. That time came and is gone now. That was in the mid-2000s, right? Zuma pulled that stunt in 2023 because he's that type of political weight who can do that. And in part, it was to address his concerns that he has with his political home, his movement that he comes from, right? That gave birth to him politically. The African National Congress. So that's why he was able to pull it off. But when you look at all these other twigs that are within the political wilderness, Abo Bosa, Abo Rise, Abo Banban, nah. Why? Because the reading of our political environment is not proper, right? People are tired. I don't know whether maybe I'm just speaking for myself. Perhaps I am this lonely voice, right? Of the mushrooming of political parties, particularly those that purport to be representing black people. People are tired of it. But also, this just merely plays into the divide and conquer strategy of the establishment. At best, it's a reformist agenda, but I thought we were done with that. Are we not? We're not trying to fix the system, a system that has institutional racism, that systematically oppresses and marginalizes its people. It cannot be. It cannot be. So why would you frame a question in such a bizarre way? That is not a revolutionary question. In fact, there's no indication of revolution in how you phrase it. If anything, you just want to become another participant in the system. And in that case, then I contend, Mr. Shivambu, that you're none too different from any other player that's out there in the field. So your vision needs to be clearly defined. We get the mission. The mission at the moment, you want to consult and speak to the people of South Africa. Community engagement, right? But what's your vision? Because look, there are various elements of a revolution, and we find that some of those already exist in South Africa. And I think that's why you can have a political strategist like Zuma who can capitalize and be like, I am forming a revolutionary movement, right? Or party, if you prefer, right? And I was thinking about it. It's not about hating or loving or whatever the case may be, since we have to put disclaimers to these things every time we talk. The MK party is perhaps the only party that has articulated itself in terms of its speeches as one that is participating in some or other form of a revolution. Right? Yes, the EFF perhaps tried doing that, but at best that the EFF gets to do this is through talking about nationalizing mines and the land thing. But beyond that, they don't. Like, its character is that of a party that is also on a reformist agenda. Right? Look at the EFF faithfuls. They are appalled whenever discussions of dismantling the system come about. When we talk about this needs to be done away with, and when there's some type of action, particularly at grassroots level, not too mad, right? Oh, no. Why? Because some of that leadership finds itself living in suburbs. They're comfortable. Gumnand, right? This is not how I want this revolution to be. Oh no, dear, no. So it becomes mere rhetoric. So look, in South Africa, we have many of these elements, right? We have discontentment, for example. So people we know are not happy with the status quo. Right? Poverty is entrenched. And this is by design. There is the worst inequality in the world in South Africa. Another reason. Then yes, we can talk about unemployment. And I don't think fixing that is the answer, unless you have a reformist agenda. But landlessness, another point of contention, and one that illustrates why people are discontent. And then, of course, the other element that we have is that institutions are deteriorated and some have completely broken down, right? But more importantly, people have lost confidence, mostly, in these institutions. That is a scary thing for the ruling class. If you're part of the establishment, you don't want that, and hence it's an element of a revolution. We've got that right now in South Africa. And this is owed to what? Issues of corruption, lack of service delivery, etc., etc. And there's no leadership. So there's no one to really prop up the system and say, look, people, it works. Isn't it beautiful? And that is why within the quote-unquote GNU, the GNU, the Grand Coalition between the ANC and the DA, the Democratic Alliance is playing that game of, look at how we have fixed this department and that department. It's part of what? It's the PR strategy to convince people that, you know what? The system is not that bad. It can be fixed. Be happy. Look at us. We're giving you a digital ID. You know what you can do with a digital ID? You can travel overseas seamlessly. Yeah, safe to say that 80% of you are all poor, so who really cares? We're doing this for the 7% who actually has the means to travel overseas, right? But anyway, it's an example. And these are things. But also, the ground is quite fertile for a revolution in South Africa. Right? So I've listed some of these things, but when you study revolutions in terms of how they have come about and what has happened in those revolutions, you see that, the South African environment is ripe. So a lot can be done. If anything, you now need the next element, which is about people who will take positions of educating and leading mass movements. Now, yes, the argument could be that, yes, a political party can be a form of a mass movement. Indeed. But not necessarily so, I would argue as well. Because when you look at how the ANC, for example, conducted itself, or maybe the Pan-African Congress, they weren't necessarily participants in the political system in the colonial and apartheid era. They are now in this neo-colonial era, definitely, but they weren't. So then it begs the question, why would you feel it's so necessary for you to start another political party when you have, in the past election, over 50 political parties on the ballot paper? It is utterly stupid. I'm sorry to put it that bluntly, but it's ridiculous to think in that way. If anything, you want to fragment the base. So if people only took the time to realize that, you know what, this is the element that's missing, and play into those gaps. And because, we are dealing with humans and not all of us are going to be noble, maybe then you use that as a bargaining chip. You go to your MK, you go to your EFFs, you go to your ANCs, or whichever other party that you deem to be progressive, and you be like, yo, fam, check this out, right? Me now, I've got this skill, I've got this expertise. I can help you when it comes to this. Can we make a trade-off? I'm sure it's the wild, wild west when it comes to politics in South Africa. Everybody wants money, not necessarily the revolution. But maybe then, on the off chance that indeed there is a revolution in the works, that's what you could do. Could you not? I don't know. So maybe then you'll be able to identify, if you are a Shivambu, that you know what, people do seem to appreciate me when I do this political education thing. People do seem to appreciate it when I empower the masses, when I mobilize within an existing structure. Can I rise into prominence that way? Perhaps. Perhaps. That's my argument. Or maybe you can create a vehicle, not a political party, through which you can aid a political party. That does not mean you have to create another political party. Now we even have like your SACPs saying that they're going to the polls. Do you understand how crazy this situation is, good people? Why can't Nyiko Floyd Shivambu, for example, say that he wants civic action, mass mobilization, to actually build this movement or help to glue it together, right? By recognizing the flaws within all these other parties and be the figure that coalesces, that brings that quote-unquote unity. He could do that. Would that not be a better accomplishment than him being appointed a quote-unquote CIC, quote-unquote supreme leader, quote-unquote president by sycophants, groupies, fans? Would it not? And then taking people on this false journey of the next 10, 20 years of, oh, we will get freedom in our lifetime. Nah. It's a waste. Waste of energy and waste of resources. And you know what? A waste of intellect by a guy who seems generally solid. That's how I deem him, right? He's a solid bloke. Shivambu, I think so. But I think, though, he's now ironically finding himself in a situation where he has many voices speaking to him. And some of those voices are indeed opportunistic. And that's actually the sad thing about politics, right? It happens to even Nabo Ufaru. He's not immune to that. I think it's easy for us to point these flaws at Ufaru as being a problem within his party, but not necessarily so. What about the people who are whispering sweet nothings to him? Why? Because they see opportunity for themselves. It happens to the best of us and the worst of us. And maybe that's what's going through Shivambu right now. And maybe that's why some political commentators are like, this is a bit sass. Right, I'm not really getting this. It's a bit wonky. He's walking on shaky ground right now. Because this movie has been seen before. And you would think someone with Shivambu's intellect, he would be wary of it. Unless, of course, we go into the realm of conspiracy theory, as I did in my previous video, and be like, maybe this Kata Kuluma Nomkul Zuma, he did not actually have one conversation. This is part of a broader strategy. And I call it conspiracy theory because at the moment it lacks more evidence to this, pointing in this direction to say that is it part of a broader strategy or not. Time will tell in that regard. Maybe that's why in part he said that he's not leaving the MK. Because the idea could be to say, you know what, we create a movement that will then bolster the MK. I don't know. or maybe a vehicle that will be unifying all these parties. I don't know. But either way, I think given all these elements that make the ground fertile for a revolution in South Africa, a reformist agenda by someone like Floyd Nyiko Shivambu does not make any sense whatsoever. Shivambu is at a very sensitive stage of his political journey. I know the argument can be made, and he often makes this argument of, I've got so much experience and so on, right? It's a bit of bravado, truth be told, right? And it's a lack of guidance, right? Being called a political scientist, for example, by someone who's been a politician for over 60 years, it can give you a bit of a big head. And he needs to be wary of these things. He needs to be cautious of not overstating his importance, because it will lead to his demise. Unfortunately, that's how it is. So anyway, what are your thoughts on all of this? Do you agree or disagree?